any moment that we have the opportunity to live, move, and have our being for granted. But we're grateful for your grace and your abundant mercy that you shine upon us each and every day as we live. And now, Lord, as we prepare now to go into the special call board meeting, we pray, oh God, that your Holy Spirit shall cover us. We pray, dear God, that we keep our children as the #1 priority for the Marion County School District. We pray for all of our board members. We pray for our leaders of the district. We pray for our entire faculty and staff of the Marion County School District, our entire school community. And we pray that through the success of our children, your name shall be praised and your name shall receive the glory and the honor. We thank you for all of the blessings that you have bestowed upon us and given into our hands. And these blessings that we ask in your son, Jesus' name, amen.
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 Thank you, Reverend Lord Berry. Notifications, calls, were we able to get hold of anybody? Okay, thank you. I appreciate that too, and I wish they were here with us. I'd like to just start by saying, first of all, we do have a quorum. Susan Pridgeon is on the phone here with us, and she is in the Boulder, Colorado airport at this time, getting ready to fly out, but she is joining us tonight. And also, Mr. Kevin Dozier is on his way here. So I'm so glad that everybody has attended, but I want to take just a special moment to thank the Marion County School staff. If you're a principal, would you stand, please? Because I see several principals with us tonight. Thank you for coming. We really appreciate that a lot, and we're glad you're here with us. Now that we have established a quorum, board, if you'll take a moment to review your agenda. Do I have a motion to accept the agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Reverend Brown. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Foxworth. With that, with a motion and properly second, is there any discussion about the agenda? With no discussion, we'll bring this to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes carry, and the ayes cover and carry this motion. Before we start our code of conduct, I just want for those that are here, and also that for those that will be following up with this, because we are recording this tonight and it will be uploaded, so anybody that's interested in hearing can be a part of it later. But the purposes in this is to make sure that for the board and for those participating, that there's a deep understanding of our student conduct policy and procedures, and that we're knowledgeable about it, and this brings forth clarity and transparency. So I really thank you, Dr. Bethea, for bringing this together tonight. Board members, I would like just to make a reminder in the discussions tonight. We cannot discuss any events, student events that is specific to a specific event. This is a discussion on what policy and procedure is. And so if we have any of those needs to take place, then we'll have to bring that up in executive session. So again, just make sure that we do not reference any specific student events as we go through for the evening. I am going to, if you'll take a moment to look under number 6, we will go through the student conduct policy. Dr. Bethea is going to lead that. We're going to talk about defining what is zero tolerance. And I want to make it clear that we do not have a zero tolerance policy. So if there's some confusion about that we have one, we do not have one as it relates to a board voted on zero tolerance policy. The third thing is addressing bullying, safety, illegal substance, where the district is, how that is handled. Dr. Bethea will be leading that. And then equity, consistency, expediency. I think really what is the knowledge of consequences and understanding how our policy stands. Board, we are welcoming questions, especially at rates relates to understanding and clarity. So, you know, we will, Dr. Bethay, get ready tonight. But again, we want this to be a really informative evening, but also an evening that leaves us with better clarity as we move forward to ensure that we have a strong and viable code of conduct. So we thank you all for being with us tonight. And Dr. Bethay, anything that I might have left out in our previous discussion?
You've covered everything. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bethay. We'll turn this over to you.
Good afternoon, board. We do have an extensive presentation tonight, information sharing, and also to get input and recommendations from the board. And I met with our chair, and at the end, I do have some recommendations as it deals with our discipline task force. But we'll go through the presentation and we'll get your input and feedback as we walk through. First thing, we want to make sure that in anything that we do in our district, that there's alignment with our strategic plan. And so wanted to start with, where does this fit in regards to our strategic plan? And when you look at priority number 3, what is titled speaking on supporting the whole child, it has our belief. We believe it's paramount to establish a safe and supportive learning environments that provide social and emotional competencies of staff and students. And that's important. And when you talk about the code of conduct, we want to make sure our environments are conducive of the needs of staff and students. Just a very brief snapshot. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that in our district, we have 3,900, give or take, students, close to 4,000 students. 61.4% of those students have not had any discipline infractions. Sometimes we forget about the population of students that are doing the right things, that are making good decisions. So I thought that was very good information to start off, that when we're talking about discipline, we want to make sure that we highlight the students that are making those good choices. But as you see below, 38% at least have an infraction of some sort. Level 1, Ms. Rush will come up in just a moment and walk through what level 1 infractions mean. Level 2 is where it's a little bit more severe, and level 3 is when you're more so at a criminal level. And so that gives you the percentage of our student population that has gotten to a level 3, which is about 3.5% of our student population. Which you see that the highest percentage is in that level 2, which we call medium type infractions that are a little bit beyond your just classroom disruption. So at this time, Ms. Rush will come up and walk us through our levels. And before she does that, just want to just make these statements about code of conduct and the purpose of our consequences. The code of conduct is in place to make sure that we have clear expectations. I know we talk a lot about equity, making sure that everyone understands what we expect, the behaviors in the learning environment, so that students and staff feel safe and respected. Consequences are in place, first thing, to deter negative behavior, but then also to make sure that our students understand that there are consequences for not following the code of conduct. So it's twofold. So at this time, Mrs. Rush.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. Just want to talk about, as Dr. Bethay has said, those different levels of conduct that our code of conduct is aligned with the state's designations for the different levels of behavior. And that first level, we have that behavioral misconduct, any activity that any of our students engage in, which impedes the orderly operations of the classroom. There are things like leaving class or disrupting class or inappropriate behavior, inappropriate language. Those are some of our level 1 behaviors as it relates to behavioral misconduct. Typically doesn't involve other students, but it's just the student doing something to be disruptive in the classroom. Okay. So our level 2 would involve mostly involve other students or behaviors that are escalated, that are more disruptive than our level 1 behaviors. Things such as a major disruption, things that would deter teaching and learning, that would involve hit, kick, and push, those types of behaviors, bite, pinch, and spit, things like that. Those are the type behaviors that we look for at level 2. And we're going to look at the code of conduct in just a little bit, but wanted to just give you a brief overview of that. And then, of course, no definition needed for criminal conduct. We all know what criminal conduct is. Those behaviors that present a serious threat to the orderly operations of our school, weapons, drugs, things like that, and some other behaviors, intimidation, bullying, those things of the sort. If you will click on Code of Conduct, it is hyperlinked. And we'll look at the Code of Conduct. So in our policy, our student conduct goes with policy JIC, but within policy JIC, we have 3 other policies that are aligned with JIC, which is suspension of students and also expulsion of students as well. So we'll take a brief look at that so we can give you a thorough overview of what we're looking at. JIC, over to J. Students, J. JIC. Click on JI. Yes. Click on the AR, administrative. There we go. All right, so again, we're looking at some of those behavioral misconduct behaviors. Again, classroom tardiness, cheating, lying, cutting class, school tardiness, truancy, which has to deal with unexcused absences. All of these behaviors would fall under our level 1 behavioral misconduct. So when we're asking our administrators to, they're having to address those behaviors in terms of corrective actions or also consequences or punitive, they may not be as severe as they would be at a level 2. However, for the persistent and repeated level 1 behaviors, then they are classified as a level 2, where the actions, because we have some repeated and persistent behaviors, therefore the actions that the administrator will take become more punitive in nature and they're a little more stringent. Right, so if you'll go down some more floors. And those would be our behavioral misconduct behaviors. For level 2, our disruptive conduct. And this, again, this you can see it's taken straight in our board policy. Use of an intoxicant, fighting, harassment, and fighting is not a level 3 behavior. Fighting is a level 2 behavior. However, if we continue to have 2 and 3 multiple fights, then after that second or third fight, then it is reclassified as a level 3, the actions for a level 3. We don't classify it as criminal, but then we get into moving into the actions for level 3 behavior, if that makes sense to you. Okay. All right, and then we have unlawful assembly and some of the responses or sanctions from our administrators. That with any discipline referral, we have to provide students with due process. So it is, you come into the principal's office or the assistant principal's office and tell us what happened. So we have the report from the teacher or the staff member, and now providing due process, we want to know from the student, what happened? What's your side of the story? And we do that without, our administrators do that without leading our students, but conducting a very thorough investigation of the incidents surrounding the discipline referral. And so we're documenting that as part of our process when we are responding to student misbehavior, student misconduct. We provide due process, we take the student statement, and then the administrator at that point in time refers back to the student code of conduct and also to look and see, let's see how many behaviors that you have had at this level or this particular behavior, and what is the incident or what is our response here at this point in time based on that behavior. Is this a repeated behavior, or is this your first time demonstrating this behavior? And then using that code of conduct to administer the consequences or the punitive actions or the restorative actions for our students. And some of those actions are in-school suspension, and that goes with policy JKE, out of school suspension, Also referring students to some of our outside agencies for support, depending on the behavior. And then also sometimes recommendations can be made for some level 2 behaviors, but only if they are repeated in nature and all other interventions have been provided by the school. We've exhausted all of the interventions. Then administrators have to recommend students for an evidentiary hearing. And then level 3, criminal conduct. Not a whole lot that we can say there, because if it falls under that heading of criminal conduct, more than likely it will be an evidentiary. 99% of the time it will be an evidentiary hearing. I don't know a time that it has not been an evidentiary hearing for criminal behavior. And so it's still providing that due process, taking the student's statement, thoroughly investigating, referring to the code of conduct for what we need to do as a district. But very often when it's criminal behavior, we have the involvement of law enforcement as well, depending on the behavior. But we have to take action as a district based on our code of conduct, particularly if it's happening within our schools, it's happening on the bus. Then we do what we need to do as a school district in terms of investigating the incident and then taking the appropriate action based on the code of conduct. So we can go back to the PowerPoint. Policy JKD, you don't have to,
Yeah.
but that is the suspension policy that goes right along with JIC. Again, bullet 1 talks about due process, that we're providing due process to students, also their parents and school personnel if there is suspension or expulsion involved. Principals they can and do suspend for, and these are definitions taken straight from South Carolina law, student conduct law: crime, gross immorality, gross misbehavior, or persistent disobedience. And also principals do on occasion have to suspend students if their presence there is some behavior that happens outside of school and then it comes back. It happens on the weekend and then it comes back. It's made it to our buildings and now it is causing a huge disruption in our buildings and impeding the orderly operations of the school. So therefore, principals, if they're having to take away time to deal with that because of weekend or outside behavior has made it to school, and that's the student's presence there, that's just an example, is detrimental to the orderly operations of the school, then principals can suspend per board policy JKD for that behavior. And of course, in JKD as well, we don't suspend for more than 10 calendar days for 10 days for any one incident or for 30 days in a calendar year. That's board policy JKD. Stacey. For the expulsion of students, we have an evidentiary hearing process that Dr. Bunch is going to talk about, and he's going to go over a little bit later. However, for those criminal behaviors where we've had expulsion of students where they're entering our district and they have been expelled from another school district, we uphold the determination from the sending school district. And so if they were expelled in another district and they're now living in our school district, then we will uphold that expulsion decision from that school district. But in terms of evidentiary hearings, Dr. Bunch will go over that process. And you know that we have that 10 days when we changed that back in October for a 10-day suspension for fights. And then students will go up for an evidentiary hearing to determine a different placement for them. The only thing that we have in board policy as it relates to firearms expulsions related to weapons, it aligns right with the Gun-Free Schools Act. And the board will expel any student who brings a weapon to school. So when students bring a firearm to school or any other incendiary device, then more than likely that will be an expulsion. And you can see that that second from the bottom, the district will not provide educational services in an alternative setting. That means that they will not be recommended to Success Academy with Mr. Woodbury for any educational services or Flexible Learning Academy per what we have in board policy as it relates to students who bring firearms to school. Ms. Wilbanks. All right, so we know that the board has an interest in zero tolerance. And so we wanted to get input from Attorney Boykin at this time, and then any input from our board as well.
Good evening. We're talking about defining zero tolerance. Okay, what I would like to do is to hear from the board. Reason for that is twofold. One, you remember from some of your earlier training, when you were setting policy, you're encouraged to talk to your colleagues in your district, talk to your neighboring colleagues in other districts, talk to the parents in the communities, and consult on the internet, get information, so that you can develop a huge database of what it is you're looking for. So that when you come back to this table, you can discuss the final points. You know what that policy is, okay? I'm going to assume that we've all done that to some level, okay? So now I need to hear, when you hear the expression zero tolerance, what does it mean? I'm happy to hear from anyone. It has been pretty too. She's on the line. I'm happy to hear from pretty too. When you hear zero tolerance, what does that mean? And while you think about this, let me explain something too. A policy must be understood by the individual or the groups who you would expect to provide.
All right, board, does anyone want to start off on their definition of zero tolerance?
It's exactly what it says, zero tolerance, but when we brung it out to,
Can I define a word or an expression with expression?
okay, so I'll go better. Zero tolerance, that's going on. Well, I have to tell you where I'm coming from before I go there.
That's correct, yes.
At one point in time, a couple months ago, we had a lot of fighting going on at one particular school. So it was brought to us, the board, to say that we needed a better way to deal with all the fighting at one high school in particular. Is that correct? No?
No, ma'am. The board had concerns about the level of activity at some of our high schools and asked us to come up with a plan or a way to address it.
Okay, so when we came to an agreement of the zero tolerance, no, that's what we out here. Let's talk.
No, I think at that time, Mr. Boykin explained, I think that a board member brought up zero tolerance. And they explained, if you recall, that some neighboring districts had done zero tolerance. That came from the board. That didn't come from administration at that time. From administration, we came back with 10-day suspensions for fighting. Before, for fighting, you got a few days. I can't remember what was the maximum amount prior to then. It was 3 to 5. And so we doubled that, and so went to the 10-day. But we didn't impart a zero tolerance.
Let me interject. The concept of zero tolerance, when it reaches court, is almost always found in the Constitution. And I wish clear, I said, zero tolerance in the Constitution is what you need. So tonight, I want to know what it is that you're looking for when you say zero tolerance, so that I can counsel you where the Constitution line is drawn. So that's where we're going. Let's make sure that we're going on the big road and not the side road to get there. Okay, so I need to know, when you say zero tolerance, she is suggesting that the Baptist deacon's mouth is not large enough to be heard. My goodness. Okay. But this is what we want. We want to know what you mean, so that these folk, when they're talking in their assembly programs and talking to the students, you can tell the students zero tolerance, and this is what it means. Zero tolerance will have the same meaning from the classroom to the gymnasium, to the schoolyard, up to the board. That meaning does not shift. So I'm giving you a chance to tell me. Now, I'm going to tell you the inference that you get when you hear zero tolerance. It means that you have no tolerance for something.
Right.
The problem, though, South Carolina's law, like all others, affords every child a constitutional right to education. It's not in the US Constitution, it's in the state constitution. When you have a constitutional right to something, that thing cannot be denied you without due process of law. Now, what is due process? Due process, first, is notice. What does that mean? If you are going to take away my right, you must give me notice of what it is you plan to do and how you plan to do it and what's the basis of your plan. Ms. Rush, I need your help. When students appear before you, their charges have been explained to them. Is that a fair statement? Okay. They, not only the charges, but the policies that were implicated. Is that fair? The policies, though, are found in the Student Code of Conduct. Would that, Reverend Westbury, would that be included in the handbooks that every student gets at the beginning of the year? Am I making, you with me? They are armed with all of that information, which the law requires, because what's at stake now is their ability to participate meaningfully in your constitutionally required educational program. We're together now? So when we say zero tolerance, my suspicions are that right now, that's not clearly defined. It will depend on who you ask as to what you get. Okay, if I'm standing here saying things and I'm happy to be corrected. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm a note taker and I'm listening to what you say.
Sure.
I think I want to go back to the bedrock of why we are here.
Okay, fair.
And I think it's much deeper than a zero tolerance policy.
Okay.
Because tonight was more than just zero tolerance, but it's about the fundamentals of our code of conduct and do they work to support our educational mission of serving all.
Excellent.
So when I hear you say that the constitutional right to an education is for all students.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
But when a student denies others from their constitutional right to be educated because their conduct interferes in the preservation and implementation of others' education, I have a problem. That when those rights supersede the rights of the student that is there wanting to get the education and we're failing to provide the environment that leads to that foundation, then that's where my issue comes in as it relates to education. And that when we allow students, and I would like to think looking at these numbers that we have 38.6 that are interfering with the ability for others to be able to participate in a strong educational system that is being provided to them by Marion County schools, and that interference is not only denying themselves of the ability to learn, but they are also embedding this denial of being able to be not only receive the education, but also to be successful in holding on to the education. So for me, this foundation of us, of ensuring that we not only have a very strong code of conduct, but we've got a code of conduct that serves all. So that when somebody is drunk, 38.6% is a big number. That's a big number. And when you have 57.6% at level 2, which is the level of hit, kick, and punch. And then I hear that you can hit, kick, and punch 2 to 3 times. I'm wondering, who does that impact besides just the person getting hit, kicked, and punched? Where's the rest of the children? They might not have been hit, kicked, and punched, but they're getting denied a safety. And in saying this, I'm not pointing fingers at anyone, but back at myself. Do we ensure that we can offer a constitutional right to all students of education? So that's
Actually, you made an excellent point. If it's my turn to talk, I'm happy to address it.
I'm pontificated enough.
Okay.
Mr. Boykin, may I say something?
Sure.
And I tread lightly on my words. That's why we have to stick to the consequences of our code of conduct. If we have the policies and we have the consequences, we have to stay firm on those consequences. And I think that I do know that when consequences are administered, I do know that there are times where parents do reach out and they do have the right to appeal. But there are times where we have to stick to the consequences, because when we bend on the consequences, to have a strong policy is great. But if you have a strong policy and we're bending on the consequences and not adhering to the consequences, I believe that's where the issue comes in.
Okay.
I don't disagree with that.
Okay.
My question is, are our consequences strong
Strong
enough? Is our consistency viable enough?
Okay.
And in this, when we look at these numbers, do we ask ourselves, is this code of conduct effective?
Okay.
That's my question.
Okay.
I mean, that's my follow-up. And I'll
First,
turn it over to everybody else.
first and fundamental, the constitutional right belongs to every student. The obligation to adjudicate that right is the responsibility of the school district. So if you have someone who engages in behavior and that behavior says, well, that person's educational rights can be cut off temporarily or up to a year, what have you, that person is entitled. That person is not 38%, not 57%. That person is one individual with those rights, protecting that person and ensuring that person to due process. Okay, so each one is on a case-by-case basis. You can set policy based on percentages, but when you are adjudicating something, it has to be based on one at a time, the evidence that's coming forward, in that situation. So when you're doing your policy, this is when you want to have your discussion. And I think the notion of zero tolerance is where that came from. That's the genesis of that. So we've still got to come back to what does that mean? Because if we have something that we are saying that we are supporting and we cannot say what it means, then you cannot expect these folk to be able to administer. If they can't administer zero tolerance, then you cannot expect the children to know what that means. And so there's an ambiguity there. So I do believe, and I'm going to come right to you, Mr. Hill, I do believe it's incredibly important if there's a feeling that the concept of zero tolerance should be interwoven into how you administer your disciplinary code. I think if that concept is important, it's important enough to be discussed and understood at a common level and incorporated. And so that's what I'm saying. Mr. Hill, please.
Yes, sir. Every district I talked to had different type policies.
Yes.
Lawrence is very strict with their zero tolerance.
Mhm.
You fight, you gone.
Mhm.
You go through the appeal process, all that stuff, but
Mhm.
they go through the process, but the recommendation is you're gone if you fight in the school, but
Mhm.
Lake City has a different variation of what they call zero tolerance, and it was intriguing. Horry County has another variation of different policy and how they handle stuff.
Right.
And I know they got money, but that's different, but everyone I talked to has different standards, and some of them call it zero tolerance, but it's not true zero tolerance.
Correct.
Mhm.
The problem is, this is what the court said. If you have a consequence that you reach without affording full due process, then that's going to be found to be unconstitutional.
Well, I believe that every child should have a due process chance
The-
with
the-
their parents. I do believe in that wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
also I do know some children using common sense needs a second chance.
Yeah.
But some students, when you look at their record, I just don't understand.
The point, the word that you said that I think is significant was that a recommendation.
Right,
What the recommendation does, it brings the matter to the hearing officer. That's what the recommendation does.
right.
But the hearing officer, in order to have real due process administered, the hearing officer must be free to listen to the case, to examine the evidence, and to reach a decision that's appropriate. Now, let me share this with you. Disciplinary matters at the heart of your policy should be reasonably calculated to correct errant behavior. I'm going to say that again. I'm too close to someplace I'm not supposed to be. Disciplinary decisions should be reasonably calculated to correct errant behaviors. If you look at your 3 levels, what's the purpose for 3 levels? Prayerfully, Pastor, I can say that. You get the child's attention the first time.
You hope so. Hopefully.
Okay, you can hope. I'm gonna pray, right? Okay,
Yeah.
but if you understand what I'm saying, and the reason I want to draw that distinction is, you see that it gets progressively stricter, progressively harsher. Because if you didn't get the attention the first time, and this is something that folk don't understand. You have 2 students and they're fighting. Going, one student never been in trouble. One student's in trouble every other day.
That's what we are.
So what happens? Arguably, to get the attention of one student, my sister, her brother, she does something, my dad look at her, that's it. Church out. You had to do it more than look at me. Am I making a distinction here? Are you understanding what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Reasonably calculated to correct the errant behavior. And the administrators on the campus know some students, if you look at that child and say, I'm gonna call your mama, is it over? Okay, because mom gonna reinforce what's happening.
That used to be.
What you say it used to be.
Yeah,
I'm not even gonna look back so I can eye nobody.
it-
Folks, is it still going on some? Okay, you still got moms, like, hey, what is my point? My point is the disciplinary policy is and its implementation is complex. If you try a one size fit all, it's like putting up wallpaper. There's going to be a bubble somewhere. And so I've been talking now almost 10 minutes, maybe a little bit
Yes.
more. And I still haven't gotten a
Yeah.
definition
Of-
for the zero tolerance. Everybody say we want it. And I'm saying, good, what is it? If this board is saying zero tolerance, and this board is not energetically describing what it is, what it should look like, how it should feel, who's surprised that these folks are saying like, I'm not really sure.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
just to kind of bring it in, what we're asking, we will administer policies as the board prescribes them. So we're asking, we've outlined the consequences. At what point, for instance, I think you made the point, in level 2, there is a need to look at the strength of the consequences is what I'm hearing.
I think that's it.
In level 2.
I would like to, if at this time, to move around to each person to be able to give you, let them present what they consider zero tolerance. So for those that feel strongly about it, does anybody would like to start by sharing how they perceive zero tolerance? Mr. Hill, we'll start with you.
According to what I've researched, it's no second chance, no nothing. You are gonna be recommended for whatever the punishment is for that offense. And you can appeal it or whatever, but you're gonna have the capital punishment right up front.
Okay, but you're using the
Certain
word,
offenses,
you're using the word recommended.
right?
That recommend does not cut off the process that they,
Right.
that they
Well,
have.
none of the school districts had a flat, you can zero tolerance, and you make a referral to your superintendent, whoever it might be, and then they go through the process. But you also have that staunch regulation right there says they're gone. But there's also appeal process and everything else there.
That is correct. And so whatever you do, and the tolerance for you all as board members must be affording due process to every child. And when you
Right.
afford due process to every child, you may not get the same result every time.
Exactly.
And so that's what, okay?
Who else would like to?
Zero tolerance is first and foremost supporting the code of conduct. The problem may be in the code of conduct more so than in the definition. Zero tolerance is not applicable across the board. Every situation will be different. Let me divert just for a minute.
Sure.
I reared 2 good sons. But here's what I always told them. If somebody hits you, you have the constitutional right. Stand your ground. You can let somebody beat you down and you never defend yourself. I said, I don't want you to fight, but if you have to fight, fight to win. And I'll take you out to dinner. Now, zero tolerance means that if a bully is bothering a child who does not want to fight, we have to have some type of policy that they did not both get the same type of disciplinary action.
Yes, right.
I'm serious. You cannot let the bully get away and punish that innocent child who's trying to simply defend him or herself the same way. I do not believe in it. Something has to be done with that stick point and the code of conduct. I think that will solve the overall situation. And we have had situations come before the board in my 17 years. Where the parent of the good child will make the appeal. Say, why are you giving my child 10 days and my child was hit first, almost beaten to death? That's where the sticking point is. That there has to be a glint, something in there to protect that innocent child who doesn't want to fight, but has to fight to defend him or herself. And that's my problem with a zero tolerant policy. Now, before I came here, I made a call into the state of Texas. My daughter-in-law is a principal of a school. She says, Texas has no zero policy. Well, she did explain that they followed the code of conduct and the procedures. And she says, Mom-in-law, the sticking point is that every situation is going to be different. Whoever that hearing officer is, whoever that principal is your defining factor. They've got to look at what happened and protect the child and not get that child the same degree of punishment as the one who's doing the bullying. So we can solve that problem in the code of conduct. Maybe we might say the child gets 10 days, it doesn't have to get an additional 45 days. Maybe we say the child gets 5 days. Something has to be done. I think that's the whole point of the fighting now. The issue with parents. Why are you punishing my child for simply defending him or herself? So zero tolerance, I would say, is not a cross-the-board factor. It must be examined based upon prior history of the child. You have a child in the 10th grade, never been in the office in his or her life, never had a fight, and you're going to tell that child you're going to get 10 days in addition to 45 days because you defended yourself? I think any parent would almost want to sue the board or anybody else for doing something like that. So we can iron out that issue, that pinpoint. That's the dividing line right there. And I think we could go forward and be better as a board and as a school district.
Reverend Brown, your point is the one I wanted to hear, and I'm going to tell you why. Everyone hears the words due process. Due process means in law, fundamental fairness and substantial justice. When you talk about due process, that's what you're aiming for. Something that is fundamentally fair, that produces substantial justice. Everyone, listen to the scenario that Ms. Brown just gave, would say the child who's not a chronic problem child should not be treated the same as one who's a bully, because that's an injustice. That was the point that I got from what you're saying. I'm going to take my seat, but this is what I want you all to get to understand. It's not going to be simple enough to come up with zero tolerance and say that fix it. It's going to require the staff continuing to work together, report back, looking at what incidents are coming up. First, I'm not going to absolve anybody from wrong, but I will say across this state, when kids returned last fall from the pandemic, Dr. Bethea, I assume that you and your colleagues all talked about what came back that time. Is that a fair statement? Mm-hmm. And my point is that the administrators, and yours are no different, in my opinion, have done an awesome job to get kids settled down. You know, we had TikTok come on, we had a number of things come on while they were, closing at home. And when they came back, all of this stuff had to mesh and find its way back on the campus. And you guys got a handle on it really quick. And if you look at where you are now, probably against where you were before, you know, I don't know whether you're getting better or getting worse. Ms. Rush, you can say that, and you may not want to speak to that just yet, but they just, came back. Sometimes we forget where we are and what we've come through. And your challenge is, in my opinion, is not to overreact, but is to continue to engage with the administration and look at what's going on, see what's needed, and continue to work. Madam Chair, your point is an excellent point, that you shouldn't let one child deny 10 other children their constitutional rights, but that one child's right still attaches. And therefore, you've got to find a way to work together to make sure that what you have is working and you're tweaking it as you can. And rather than just starting over, but you're tweaking it. And the inquiry is, what else do you need? What else can we do? What are some of the things that we can do to make this work and work even better? But if we go back and allow ourselves to really think about it, school opened up after almost 2 years last year, if that makes sense. And they were fighting everywhere. I mean, kids were just as if they had not seen each other. I'm not defending them. I am describing what these folk had to deal with for the first half of the school year.
And I think this board totally supports the school administration and giving them the support they need. Yes, Mr.
Attorney Barkins, you never finished your statement that you was talking about kids. What would you do if a bully attack a young child and then the little young child get the same amount of time, or what would you do? What was your point? Because you never made your point. What would you do? And I want to hear your point.
My point is
They both fault. Yeah, they fault.
I'm saying you are going to have the strength as policymakers, as adjudicators,
Okay.
to be able to recognize and to be able to articulate, because we haven't gotten to the elephant in the room just yet.
No.
Okay, the elephant in the room is we talk about a special education student. Everybody sees special education student and another student engaged in the same conduct, and one kid is gone. If the next kid, the special ed kid, is still there, or can still be seen. Right. That's something hard to understand. But that's the notion that is in the same category as having a kid who normally follows the rules, but who gets caught up in something where the rules aren't followed. And you say, you're going to feel both on the same school. We've got to have people to understand that they need difference. Yeah. That's the point that I'm seeking to make. But if you say zero tolerance, every fight or every transgression, regardless as the background, produces the same result. And that's why I want to hear, what are we talking about? Because we've got to be able to recognize, if you ask me, and you got first, you said, what do I think? I think most of the disciplinary problems are because the kids are two at different levels. So when you take the child out for a while, let him think about it and see whether or not he can come in and act like everybody else. But it's the difference in maturity. There's some that just plain bad, I know, that kind of thing. I probably want them too. But the point is, they're maturing and they can handle different things in different ways. The biggest fight that I've seen involving children, particularly from middle Brother High School, is when somebody gets embarrassed. That's the biggest fight. When somebody gets embarrassed, that's when it's on. From that standpoint. I mean, if you look at the people who work on this every day, the people who see this every day, they're the ones that I would look to from the very beginning. What's it going to take to get this thing down? What's it going to take to be able to manage this? If they're not getting the results, then we need to talk. But they're there working with.
And one of the things that we all know about children see that difference quickly. They recognize unfairness really, really fast. And so when you see two things and the results needs to be different, the person who administered and who interacted with children is in the best position to get people to understand. That's the base. But if they're just saying, well, this is what the board requires, or this is what the law requires, here we had a gun-free zone on there, that was earlier. Everybody saw that. And the language, even that is wrong, because it said, possession of a gun, this is what happens. Legally, one determined to have possessed a gun on campus. Yes, this time. So, but they intentionally wrote it the way they did, but it's still that determination. The board ends that time. The board has to expel that child for 12 months, right?
Yes.
Correct. But what's the next, what is the very next provision beyond that? Does anyone recall? The very next provision is that the superintendent by federal law has the right based on a case-by-case basis to adjust that. What happens if you don't know what's coming from Congress? It went out the window. Based on the circumstances of the child, the circumstances of the event, the superintendent by federal law has the right to change it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I want us to understand, zero tolerance, it sounds good, but disciplining children in a rearing process, raising them and educating them is complex. My hats off to all of them.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
And Mrs. Foxworth, and to the rest of the board, what I feel that I'm hearing, we're taking this information, so as the discipline task force convenes, then the policies that we're putting in place will align with what the desires are. But what I'm hearing right now, to make sure all board members first understand what happens right now with just fighting. Of course, we know there are various infractions, and I do want to be provide clarity in that 30-some% of students. Many of those are truancies are in there as well. So all those are not physical. Okay, I just want to make sure I didn't make that clarification. But right now, what happens with the fighting, 10 days, if it is a true fight where both are engaged. Now with 10 days, some children do not go anything beyond the 10 days. They have the hearing, they go back after administration, the hearing officer, they look at all the details, and it could have been a situation where the child that engaged really, it was kind of provoked. So we've had many cases where those kids, after the 10 days, they have gone back to school with absolutely your 10 days were your only consequences. Because I do feel like there's a misunderstanding that everybody that gets 10 days, you get something else. That's not always the case. Some kids go straight back to school. Some can go back to school on probation. That means that you had this incident. We looked at the details. It didn't want you going to alternative school or virtual, but you can't have any more level 3s and you can only have so many level 2s. So you go back on probation is what that means. And we have many of those too. But then you have the ones, if they determine it was a true altercation between the individuals, then that's when you get the alternative school or an alternative setting, which could be alternative school or virtual. So there are 4 different things that could happen. So I don't want you to think that every child that gets to 10 days automatically gets an alternative setting. That is not the case. So my question to the board, looking at moving forward, as we're planning our code of conduct for the upcoming year, you want us to look at, is the 10-day automatic, or at that time, looking at the details and not necessarily doing a straight 10 days for fighting, but looking at the circumstances is what you're saying.
Madam Chair, can I?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Dr. Hayes, I literally that it should come to the agreement of the principals at that time.
Mhm.
And only because if you ever try to cook a meal and go by a recipe and the recipe don't go well, so you tweak it like you want it.
Mhm.
So I believe that a principal and their staff at that time should take
Make
upon
that
themselves, say, this is what we need. My whole thing was, and I never got consistent, but zero tolerance, when it came to, we want discipline to be had, right? But we also want the children to go back to school. And majority of the things that we hear, these children are out of school 10 days plus. They're still waiting on their hearing. That's one of the things that we have to address, the turnaround for the hearing to go back into the.
We have checked and right now, we only know of 3 cases where protocol was not properly followed out of all of those. And Ms. Foxworth, because I know at the last meeting you talked about students being out, you said I don't even want to repeat the number. I won't even repeat the number. But that was during a holiday break. No children were in school. It was they were December events. We went back and checked, and we can talk about that later. And so it was an extensive amount of time, but you did have a holiday break. But we are looking at the time frame. Hearings are happening within that 10-day period. Our goal is to make sure that we can, within that 10-day period, to have the hearing and then also notification. How we've already met to talk about how can we expedite parent notification, because if we're waiting on the mail in Marion County to get there, then exactly. So we're making sure that the parents are being contacted by phone and that it is as quick as possible as soon as that hearing is being held. That's our commitment.
So Dr. Cadet, would it be better for you at each school to have a hearing officer at that level of school instead of it have to come to the district?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. But we're looking to expedite the cases. And so in essence, right now, the discipline task force will look at the 10 days as we move forward. And then what discretion needs to take place? Is it an automatic 10 days or is it a 10-day? And what circumstances do we look at? Right now, the goal is that administrators are looking at, all of the information. But some of that is being looked at while they are gathering the information for the hearing or gathering the information. So it may be after the fact. And so we'll come up with a process that is in the best interest of the child, but also in the best interest of making sure that we keep our learning environments conducive. And so Ms. Rush and that team will work on that.
Are you having any comments or any concerns coming from your principals that we might can hear, or that they can tell us that we can keep in mind while we're trying to come up with a policy? Is it something else like?
Yes, they are on the discipline task force, and at the end, you will see, I have a recommendation. I've already spoken to the chair about this. I'm recommending that the board has representation on the discipline task force. We have administrators on the task force, we have parents. We also feel like it would be best to have a board member or 2 on the discipline task force as a recommendation. So you can be at the table when we're developing and being more proactive versus reactive as things happen. Yeah.
Dr. Bethea, in response to the zero tolerance, I don't like the word zero, but I love the word tolerance. That we just don't tolerate some certain behaviors. And looking again back at your levels 1, 2, and 3, and looking at level 3 being a 3.51, and that under level 3, we have the bullying in the community and parents. 2 of the big issues that I continue to get many phone calls about is the level of bullying in the school. Not so much the level of fighting and the concern of drugs. I think my question is, in looking at level 3, that's my, if you wanted to say zero tolerance level, I have no tolerance for criminal behavior and any of those things that fall underneath that. But I also have a little tolerance for fighting. I can understand children they're not adults and they don't have the reasoning capabilities that adults have. Even adults don't have reasoning capabilities at times, because we see it on the news every night. But here's my concern. Does this policy that we have, not the policy, the procedures and the levels and the consequences, do they serve the principals to the degree that they are not, and I'm gonna say this, principals, and y'all shake your head yes or no, shackled by a consequences that it's too much of a burden? Because sometimes we can be really proficient in creating these amazing documents, but often they're so grandiose that they become less than proficient. So I don't know. I feel like if you've got this group, that those are the discussions that are coming out of it. Does it serve us well at the school level? Does it make
And that's why you have
discipline
them.
easy as opposed to not so easy? And therefore, I just don't have time for this and all of the work that comes with it. So I don't know. But it's in my thought just because of being an educator in the past.
Yes. And so you're with the bullying in terms of them dealing with the issues of bullying, and I'll let Ms. Roy speak. Normally, when bullying is first brought to attention, it is handled through guidance. Usually it's handled through guidance unless it's gotten to a high level. Because from a guidance perspective, you're trying to teach kids how to work through the situation. But when it comes to a point where bullying gets to the point of true intimidation, that's when it becomes administrative. And there are protocols and there what do you call them, safety plans, that when you get a report of bullying, if you want to speak to that, Mrs. Rush, about how each principal is expected, if there is a concern with bullying, to develop some type of safety plan for that particular child, whether it's you check in with this adult each day, I mean, whatever is needed. And so I won't say that principals are too busy to deal with any discipline. No, it's our expectation. No, absolutely. That's right.
Yeah, Mr. Hill.
Can we make it easier for children to report bullying? Because some of these young men think they macho and stuff, and they too wrong to go tattletale on bullying. Is there a way we could come up with a way to make it easier to report bullying going on? Because unless somebody tells an administrator or teacher or somebody, nobody's gonna know about it.
Yeah.
Madam Chair.
We can better promote our reporting tool. Most of our, what is it? See something, say something. And yes, and people do use it where you can go online, and many of our, well, they have their computers, so they have access to go in and fill out the form, but we can probably promote it more. Mr. Hill, we have the resource, but making sure that everybody, and not just promoting it at the beginning of the year, just at different benchmarks promoting it.
A lot of these young males think they're too wrong to
Mhm.
go tattletale on somebody or vice versa, but try to make it easier for them to do it.
Mhm. I get what you're saying, but a lot, and especially as you get older too,
Right.
just not wanting to say something. We will promote and think of other ways that we can encourage. Because
May I say
that's what
one more
happens. We
thing?
don't want to, after the fact of a fight happening, and then you say, I was bullying, that we were aware of it before, so we can kind of attempt to address it. I'm sorry.
May I say one more thing, Madam Chair?
Yes, ma'am, Reverend Brown.
When it comes to the bullying, and I think I heard Dr. what they said they can report it online. Did I hear that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. My concern has always been, why aren't our teachers spotting bullying more? I taught in high school and junior high, and I could recognize, I'm not the only one. When a child was being bullied, and I used to call in some students and sit down and talk with them, why are you picking on this child? I became the first step of solution. We've seen in the news, superintendents resigning, some principals resigning, because parents are saying, my child reported the bullying to a teacher, not just to one, and they didn't say anything. They said, oh, grow up. And then when something really got out of hand, and they found out that the teachers were not reporting what they were seeing, then the parents called for a lot of teachers to resign. somebody in the school, some adult, whether it's the janitor, the teacher. When I was in school, Dr. Buffet, we had to stand at the door between the changing of classes.
Ours do too.
And we stood at that door, we were watching the kids. And if somebody pushed somebody, or we could hear and see all of that. So I really want more to be done. I'm asking the principals in your meetings to really talk with your teachers, how to identify bullying. I had a student at Marion High School. When she came to my class, she was always happy because she knew I was protecting her. If she raised her hand to ask a question, I noticed there were 2 or 3 girls just laughing, snickering under their breath. I spotted that. And I asked her one day, what's going on? And she said, Ms. Brown, they just harassed me. And then I took it to the next level to the principal, and then we got the problem solved. So teachers should be trained and should be able to get involved when it comes to spotting bullying. Reverend, you and I had our classes across the hall from one another, Jonica. And I spotted a student harassing you. I met with the student and I met with you, and we solved the problem.
Reverend Brown, thank you. I
Thank
would
you.
like at this moment, does anybody else have anything to say before I propose 2 pieces for moving forward? I want to go around to each one. Do you all want at this time to establish that Marion County has a policy that uses the verbiage zero tolerance? We will start with that first. So if you'll just give your response to that before we move forward. Reverend Brown, do you want a policy that utilizes the word zero tolerance?
You want the verbiage, the
Yeah,
words,
the
zero
word- the
tolerance?
words would say, even we've listened to what our attorney has advised us. Do you want a policy that says zero tolerance?
No.
All right, Mr. Hill?
No, ma'am, but I want a policy that tightens up
Okay.
and helps. Number 2 is help students. I want every child to be able to learn and be safe at school.
All right. Mr. Dozier?
No.
Ms. Foxworth?
No.
Ms. Pridgeon? Oh, she's hung up. Oh, I'm sorry. And my response is no. So with that, we do not want verbiage use zero tolerance. The next thing that I'm going to present to this board, instead of us spending the time tonight to come up with a, as Mr. Hill said, we want something that gives a stronger response to certain behaviors. Am I correct?
Right.
Are we comfortable as a board to turn this back over to Dr. Buffet and her team to come up with a policy to present to us that would meet what we feel like would meet our level of tolerance of certain behaviors?
Madam Chair, is that with board representation on the
Yes,
task
with
force?
board
I think
representation.
needs to be board involvement.
And it will be ready by next school term.
And that it would come, that this could come back to us
Yes.
in a month?
Or you can do it in a month.
Or what about by the April meeting? That means we've got March and half of April. Could that be something that could be brought forward by
By
then?
April.
Or by May? Which one
Let's
would be
do the May.
better?
Can we do the
follow-up
May?
with the whole board?
At the May meeting?
Maybe.
Okay. And that we could get some follow-up in each board meeting as to how it's moving forward.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that we would receive. Are we good in turning this back over with the understanding that we, as a collective group, we are concerned about behavior in the schools, and that students are getting due process in a timely manner, and that consequences are judicial and given appropriately across the school district so that all schools, am I representing us appropriately? Is there anything that anyone needs to add to that?
I believe, Madam Chair, if you don't mind,
Yes,
with
ma'am.
like make a whole policy on bullying. I think that a whole policy on bullying, that way we can clear up. You know, if you're bullying somebody, and I do know we have a policy somewhere, because not taking it personal, but I remember if you're being bullied in a fight, if you hit back, you're a fighter too. So we have to figure out how to, you can't tell a child fight back, because I know it's against one of our policies. But I go here.
We'll look
You
at the.
can't walk up to someone and not expect them to protect themselves. You've been told, everybody been told, like our attorney said, I think it was Robert Rail said, you go protect yourself and don't come back home unless you do. So we're gonna act like we remember those statements. And if we think about it as a bullying, if it's a situation that a child is being picked on daily, I do encourage us to tell the parents, make reports, keep paper trails, it work in your favor. That comes together to say, I talked to the teacher, I talked to the principal, I talked to someone other than my sister to tell them that my child is gonna get, a paper trail helps you every time. When you have it, text messages or calls to the school or visits to the school, it helps. They say, I've made somebody aware of this. If we can get the information, Ms. Rush, more out there. I know about see it, tell it, because I'm one of the people that want to know what bullying is going on with. But everybody does not know that we can have an adult at the school to go to and speak with to say, hey, I'm having problems. I don't want anybody to know that they're picking on. There's got to be some kind of way a child feels comfortable if they can't go home and tell their mom, because mom's gonna say go fight. It's different situations again for everybody, and I just want to make sure that our kids, like everybody else said, and we sit around the table to do the same thing, are protected, have the ability to learn in a safe environment.
Absolutely.
And we're giving our administrators what they need to run their school. I say their schools because we can't tell them what they need daily, but they can tell us what we can give them to get what they need, I guess. I don't know.
Good.
Thank you,
And
Ms.
so-
Foxworth. Mr. Dozier, anything that you would like to add?
No.
Mr. Hill?
Well, we live in a different time, different age, and we've got to adjust all the time because it's different. We have a lot of households that don't have parents, a lot of parents that don't care. We just got to change with the times and make it better, because we got to find a way to reach our children. Yes, there's problems out there, there's problems every day, but we got to find a way to reach them and do the things we need to do to make it better. And whether we know it or not, bullying is a problem. And I was a kid way back yonder growing up, I was bullied. Don't mind saying it. And the answer was beat the tail.
Board, this is a really important meeting tonight. And this is our chance to make sure that we get across our concerns and our depth of concern. So please do not be hesitant to speak your voice tonight, because it's critical that we leave here with a sense that that we're moving forward and that we can accomplish is in the best interest of the child. And we understand that. We know what our job is that we're in the business of the child, and you all are in the business of the child, and therefore we've got to move forward with it. But again, is anybody have anything to say that they would like to make sure that this team is going to carry on with? Because I'm looking at the third one, addressing bullying, which Ms. Foxworth just said that we need to have a whole separate piece on bullying. Another piece that was brought up is that all of this impacts safety of our children, especially the last one when we have illegal substances coming on our campus. So again, please, at this time, is there anything that needs to be shared that we're leaving with them as far as verbiage or what needs to be said or what needs to be heard?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr.
Dr.
Douglas.
Bethea, I know we asking about the zero tolerance. That's out of the question now. And we up here asking, saying what we want. But the question is and stuff, what I want to know is the principles. How y'all feel about this right here? How y'all feel about the policy? Cause y'all the ones in the school. I mean, y'all the ones who in the school. I just want to know how they feel about it. I mean, I really want to know because they the one who run the buildings and stuff. I mean, they're sitting here looking at us.
Yeah.
We trying to make the decisions for your school. So I want to know how y'all feel about it. Do y'all agree with the policies or y'all agree with what we trying to do? Or what the changes we trying to make? Is y'all happy with it? I mean, that's what I want to know. I mean, we sitting here, I'm sitting here with my mind like, golly, we sitting here trying to make these policy changes for the best for our students, but
Yeah.
we didn't give their input to the principals yet.
I will say this, Mr. Dozier, that when we did the 10-day for the fighting, many of the principals did reach out and were very supportive. And even
Okay.
some of our 3 through 5 principals reached out to see if that applied to them. When we did that, it was 6 up. And so at that time, now their feelings have changed since that time. If we have a representative from a group that would just like to briefly say, their feedback just very briefly, but at that particular time, they were very supportive of the 10 days because we had to get our schools back in order.
I'm sorry.
But what we will do, but Mr. Dozier, now, Mr. Dozier, what I will say, for the board representation that is at the discipline task force.
Yeah.
Our leaders will be more open to engage in that type of setting, I think is more appropriate.
It's not only the fighting, but other little things,
Yeah, that's what the discipline task force is for. That's what the
got you, I
discipline
got you.
task force is for. That's when you have those rich discussions and everyone can be forthcoming. This doesn't work for us. This is what we want to see differently. That is the time for that level of discussion.
Okay.
And that's why I would like for a representative of the board to come to that table. That's just a recommendation that is up to you.
We will, that will be discussed.
Okay.
Again, we do, Dr. Bethea, and I think Mr. Dozier made it very clear. The principals are the boots on the ground. And we know that. So we know that this has to work to their benefit. And provide them with the leverage that they need to ensure that these children are getting the opportunity to learn in the classroom. Anything else? And Mr. Dozier, I totally agree with what you just said.
But they will share freely in the task force.
I
And I in the task force. I mean, they follow up with me. If I'm needed, I do come. And so they freely are able to discuss it.
I mean, their voice is important,
Oh,
very
yes.
important.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Kind of like said that with the recipe, you can't give a recipe and not tweak it for yourself.
Yes.
Well, I'm just gonna be straight blunt. with
And
you.
all schools,
I can't.
and all schools have representation on the task force. All schools are represented on the task force.
Dr. Bethea,
Right now, we do have bullying. We will not go into detail in the bullying. It just pretty much review the same thing that Ms. Rush, she reviewed this with the board, this component. I think it was like the October meeting, perhaps, Ms. Rush.
Right.
And so nothing has really changed. So we won't go through that, but it will come back to the task force, especially since you want to look at it as separate and more extensive detail. And the same thing with illegal substances. Just want you to know real briefly about the hearing process. And when I say briefly, very briefly, Dr. Bunch. And Dr. Bunch, you can just tell about the packet, just tell about it.
Okay, so if you go to the next screen, so in the process for the hearings that we have, there is an extensive process that we go through. As you all know, there is a referral that starts at the school with the investigation of the principal or the administrators or teachers or staff that are there. Is well written, is well documented, very clear, very concise. That information is then shared with the family for personally or over the phone, and given a copy of that information to make sure they understand what's going on and the number of days or ISS, or if it's just a conference or whatever that goes along that way as well. We also have.
Wait, she's just gonna click on the hearing packet, so you could just briefly
Thank you.
tell.
Perfect. So
what it
on
is.
the hearing packet, just want you to see, like, never mind, it's too much to get through there. You'll see it on the hearing packet, if there is an evidentiary hearing. It is very extensive, a lot of information. It can take as little as one afternoon. If it's a small amount of information, it takes several days if law enforcement is involved or other witnesses or things are needed. So the process goes as quickly as it can. And sometimes it's just one afternoon. Sometimes it may take several days, depending on what agencies are involved. And then in the hearing, to tell you how the hearing works, once the packet is ready, it is sent to my attention, is also sent to Ms. Rush to make sure that all the information is there, all the documents that are needed are in place. If something is missing, it is sent back to get it taken care of along the way. And then the hearing is scheduled within those days while the child is suspended. And during that time, the parents are contacted to find a time when they can come in. It's convenient for them to meet with us and the school officials. And then the hearing is held. And again, is a very, I'll just call it a script that we follow. And the script tells us exactly how the hearing is to be held, who speaks when, how we're to act in there, and then when the parent is to be notified. They're given a date for when they're notified for what's going to happen when Dr. Bethea has that information. They're also notified at that time of the appeal process and how the appeal process and how they can respond to Dr. Bethea, and they can request a time to meet with she or the board if that be their desire. So, folks, it is a very scripted process. It is we've gone through it over and over again, and we use this process every single time. We don't pick and choose any one part or another. It is very thorough, and we ensure that all parties have an opportunity to speak. All parties are informed, and again, the due process is there. And again, if there's a disagreement with the hearing officer, disagreement with Dr. Bethea, then the appeal process is there for everyone to use, and we follow that process clearly every single time. Okay, Dr. Bethea.
Thank you. We did have about the transition process, but I think, Reverend Woodbury, Mr. Woodbury, if you would come up, at the last meeting, while we're looking at the code of conduct, we're also looking at the alternative school as well, our process. Mr. Hill brought up several that he'd heard from, I think, the recent conference. We have touched base with each individual, entity that you did bring up. And so we're not going to go through the transition, but we really want Mr. Woodbury to tell a little bit about what we found out from the Rush Academy from Florence One, and then the SOAR program from Horry County. We're just looking at other models. We're not recommending a model right now. And we have a couple other models from the state that we want to look at as well, some from the upstate that I've heard about as well. So while we're doing the code of conduct, we may also be coming back at some point before the start of the new school year, looking at our model for alternative school as well. Okay.
Florence District 1, the AE Rush Academy, they base their assignment of students to their alternative program in 3 phases, and there are 45 days per phase. The first 45 days, the students go there virtually. They attend virtually. Within that 45 days where the students are getting the virtual instruction, they also have mandatory weekly counseling sessions as well, along with family counseling as well with the Wellspring Psychology Group, a district partner with the Florence School District 1. And with those weekly counseling sessions, it goes to progress as well. And then the second phase, the second 45-day phase, they are matriculated back into the alternative setting on campus. And within that 45 days, again, they do the counseling sessions to measure the progress. And they also have something called the Box and Life Skill Curriculum. It focuses on decision-making, peer pressure, negative influence, accountability, and how to become a successful student. And also, there's a monthly counseling session with the parents and students as well, too, in phase 2. And then in phase 3, they go back to their base school. Within that 45 days, something similar to what we do when our students transition back to the base school. They are assigned mentors, weekly counseling sessions, and monthly meetings between the school, student, and the parents. That is mandatory. They must fulfill all of the requirements in each of those 3 phases at the AU Rush Academy. And then Horry County has the SOAR Academy. And they developed their program in 3 different tiers. You have tier 1, which is 3 weeks, tier 2, which is 6 weeks, and tier 3, which is 10 weeks. And it's based on academics, attendance, the discipline, and also basically advisory or character coaching. Now, tier 1 is more of the less serious offenses. And then when you get into tier 2, it is more of those level 2 that we have here in our county. And you have to get an amount of points in each of those tiers. And if you get those amounts of points in the tiers, then you are considered to be eligible to return back to your school. If you don't meet the requirements, you stay there until you get those points. And counseling sessions are required. And I like with Horry County, community service is mandatory as well. Community service is mandatory as well. And then when you get into tier 3, that's more of the serious offenses, criminal offenses. It's a 10-week program, but you have to spend at least a minimum of 4 weeks in the program. And each tier, if the students are progressing well, they can shorten their time. If the students are not progressing well, the administration can see that that student move to a more severe tier as well. And again, the counseling session is required and also community service. So that's generally a summation of both AE Rush Academy and also the SOAR program at Horry County.
Sorry, Mr. Rivera. So right now, our recommendations is to maintain what we have for the remainder of the year, but taking a special look at each individual case when we have incidents of fighting to look more thoroughly to see if bullying has played a role. Then we are also recommending that we continue with the work of the discipline task force, but with board member representation, I think will be very beneficial. And then what we want to do is quickly review how to expedite the evidentiary hearing process, Mrs. Foxworth. So those are in a nutshell, those are the things that we want to work on right now. And so we will take all the information that was shared tonight. We will get a schedule of when our next discipline task force will meet, share that information with the board. Hopefully by that time, the board will decide who will be representing the board on the task force to be able to provide input as we move forward. And our goal will be to make sure by the May board meeting that we do have our code of conduct ready to present to the board. And at some point, expect some updates to our alternative school program too, as we continue to look at the various models. And one of the roles of the task force, we will take a deep listening to the board feedback tonight, looking at the alignment between those level 2 actions and the consequences, a deep dive into that. Thank you.
As far as any more discussion from the board, do we have any at this time?
Just one discussion.
Yes, Ms. Fox.
When will we get together to figure out who's gonna be on a disciplinary task?
As soon as this meeting's over.
Okay.
We're gonna just gather. Okay. Any discussion?
A motion. A motion that
I don't see any need for an executive. Do we need an
No.
executive session?
We don't.
We don't have the discussion because of us having,
You might want to just go ahead and pass.
right now, you're right, because we've got a quorum. At this time, do we have anybody interested in serving on the board? Or do you have somebody that you would like to nominate?
Oh, man.
Okay, I would, Reverend Brown, I would like to nominate Mr. Dozier. So we have Reverend Brown, we have Mr. Dozier. Do we have anybody else that's
I don't mind
interested?
being on it either.
Okay, so we've got 3. So
Bridget probably said it. Yeah, we in Bridget probably want to do it, so we have to probably vote.
yeah, we've got, at this time, we have 3 people that are interested. And Mr. Hill.
No,
No,
I ain't said
Mr.
a
Hill
word.
says no.
I ain't
Okay,
said a word.
We can't have a.
I ain't said a word.
all right.
Got Mr. Dozier over there talking.
Okay. Then we're gonna have to bring this to a vote, guys. We'll start with Reverend Brown. we need one person to do, correct? One
Nikki,
representative?
I would say two. in my
Two.
opinion.
Two representatives. Okay, if you would please, we'll do this by ballot.
Mr. Orkin, can you?
And then I will call out the results. How about that? I think that it's gonna be way too confusing. I got the paper.
Wait a minute, wait a minute.
We have
Wait a minute.
another.
Yeah.
It's gonna, I mean, okay, we've got two. This is gonna be interesting figuring out how to get two people out of three. So all those, I'll start with the first one. All those in favor of Reverend Brown to sit on this board. We have two.
I think Reverend Brown's good.
Okay, okay. All right, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. All those for Kevin Dozier. You only get 2 votes, people.
Oh, hold up, you didn't say that.
Well, you only can vote for 2. All right, we will start again and I'll make sure the rules are clear. You have 2 votes. We have 3 members, Reverend Brown, Mr. Dozier, and Ms. Foxworth. We'll begin again with the first one. All those that would like Reverend Brown to represent us on this board. We have 2, 3. All right. All those for Kevin Dozier to serve on this board. We have 4. And then all those for Nadine Foxworth. So we have Reverend Brown and we have Kevin Dozier that will be serving on this.
And Madam Chair, the next meeting will be March 13th.
All right,
March 13th,
March 13th. At what time?
3:30.
Will it be
And
here?
at the district office. Ms. Gauss will send a reminder
You got
to
something right.
those 2 board members. And Ms. Gauss, you don't have to wait until
3
You
o'clock.
can go ahead and send that tomorrow.
All right. So we now have our representatives. There's no need for executive session. So I have one motion for tonight. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion properly carried. Mr. Dozier, thank you. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? And the motion carries. Thank you, and thank
Thank you
everybody
so
for
much.
being here tonight.
I do.
Oh, my goodness, that baby is here.